Today's episode is a guest podcast episode. I was on Nicky Davies' Developing Inspired Leaders podcast a while ago, and I thought I would share it with you today. It's a great conversation. Nicky is a great interviewer and a good friend of mine. She asked me about the guitars that are hanging on the wall behind me when I'm on Zoom. We talk about NPA and the NPA process, and we talk about resolving conflict, finding your own personal conflict map, and working with your parental energies to resolve that core inner child's work. We even get into, is Nicky a bad girl? Archetypes, identity, it's a fab conversation. I hope you enjoy it. This is episode number 138, which means you can find the show notes today at www.babrillianthuman.com/138. And there we go. Over to you, Nicky. Welcome to the Be a Brilliant Human podcast with me, Joel Young. If you're looking to improve your life, to heal, to grow, and mature as an individual, but maybe you found that some of the personal development and consciousness stuff has given you the impression that you need to be super serious and vigilant to get anywhere meaningful, or feeling like maybe you're just not up to snuff, well, this show is here to remind you of your humanity, and in fact that's where your true joy and brilliance lies. With over 25 years of experience in the transformation biz and having developed NPA, one of the world's simplest, pressure-free approaches to growth and well-being, if I do say so myself, I'll be sharing tips, steps, and insights that'll help you navigate all the aspects of life as a growth-seeking being. On this show, it comes to you with a good dose of humour, maybe a smattering of colourful language, a reminder not to take things so personally, and most importantly, to be kind to yourself along the way. Make sure you hit that follow button, and let's get into it.
Hi there, Nicky here, and with me on this podcast episode, I have Joel Young. And Joel and I have known each other for a while. We're actually in a mastermind group together. So it's fantastic to have him on my podcast here. Welcome, Joel.
Hello.
And Joel is the creator and custodian of NPA, which stands for Non-Personal Awareness. And the non-personal awareness, NPA process, has touched the lives of millions around the world, helping them to stop taking things personally. And boy, do we need help doing that. It helps you let go of blocks and start living your dreams. Joel has over 25 years of experience healing and teaching internationally, and he brings a depth of wisdom and a great deal of energy and humor to his inspiring talks, seminars, and one-to-one practice. He has a passion for helping coaches, healers, and change workers rise to mastery and do the magical work they were born to do. Hello, Joel, and welcome to this podcast.
Hey, Nicky, thanks so much for having me on. I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, for me too. And I'd really like to start with where your journey started, because I know I can see behind you, you have a number of guitars sitting on the wall. And I don't know, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guitars that I can see hanging on your walls. So it would be really lovely if you could describe where you started on this journey and how you got to non-personal awareness as a process.
Wow, yeah. So yeah, the guitars.
Yeah.
Well, when I was a kid, I started learning guitar when I was 8 years old, and I found I had a natural talent for it. And born in me was this wish and dream, and basically my whole school life was based on that I was going to be a rock star. So I did all the classical grades, and I was in a rock band when I was like 10 or 11 and went to secondary school. No one else played, so I got my friends to get instruments for Christmas, taught them to play so that I could have a band. And we used to go pre-pubescent and play. We had the village I grew up in was like it somehow had lots of music pubs in it, and we used to go and play in between. Like the main band would come off, and we'd say, "Can we go on in the
Oh wow,
our thing?" So I'd always been in bands, and then I guess I didn't do very well at school. I mean, I did okay. I was bright, but just had I didn't see the point. What is the point of these A-level things? when I'm going to be a rock star and I'm in a band. And so I kind of flunked out of that and went to college, got into a band that was much more serious, I suppose. And we did okay, excuse me. We ended up almost being signed by Sony. We were kind of in the alternative rock scene, sort of punk alternative rock stuff, a kind of a classic middle class, angry young men, wouldn't be seen dead playing a standard chord, thrashing our guitars and screaming at the world. And we did pretty good on the alternative circuit. We had a couple of singles out. We were about to get signed by Sony. Had a big European tour lined up. And when I think it was Suede was the band that came along. And it was one of those things where the landscape of music, certainly the alternative scene, changed overnight. And suddenly you're not Suede. We don't want you anymore. And it was like, devastation.
Yeah.
So we kind of fell apart after that. And I ended up, I'd met my soon-to-be first wife. And we kind of dropped out, went out to Southeast Asia, traveled around. And that was where my sort of interest in personal development came. I was drinking a lot and doing a lot of substances at the time as well. And those things all kind of conspired, and going away to a different culture, traveling, unplugging, and also because she was a singer, we'd come back to basics and doing simple sort of more folky music as well. Along that path, she also got sick. And we, at the time, I was ashamed to say now, I was so like, no, you go see a doctor. That's how it works. Right. Yeah. But none of all the doctors just said, go away. We don't understand it. Therefore, it's not real. It's all in your head. Gosh. But that got us into the path of exploring alternatives. And I ended up booking us to go on a seminar with someone called Brandon Bays, who does a process called The Journey. A book's quite well known in the field. My first wife, it worked really well, but I don't think she liked that. Because it meant change, right? Although I must say, I'll be fair to her, she really is into change and stuff now. I ought to say, well, I am saying that it's true. But what I found was I actually fell in love with that process. I realized in the facilitation, because it was one of those workshops where you pair up and facilitate other people, that I was good at it. And I really loved that experience of helping people. But one of the things about it, which is really interesting, given what I do today, is I would get very stuck in doing the process. As I knew I could do it well, and yet I got stuck. And it's quite interesting because over time, it's really, I've begun to realize that what I'm doing now with NPA, I'm sure we're going to get onto NPA, but one of the things about it is I call it the agendaless way, because how I learned to become basically what Brandon called me the best therapist in the Northern Hemisphere was because what I really did was I threw away the script. I kept true to the essence of the nuts and bolts and the sort of the process that she was teaching, but there was a real moment, because I would be the person that they would send in when, in a big room full of people, and you'd have delegates going through it. They'd cross process with other delegates, then they'd get stuck, and then they'd send a trainer in, and then when that trainer couldn't do it, they'd send another one in, and then they'd send me in, and I could always seem to resolve it. But what people would come to me and say, Joel, what are you doing? And I didn't know at the time, but what I was doing was literally putting the script down and allowing myself to be much more intuitive in how I work with people and really listen and respond to the client, rather than using the dogma of the script, which is the essence of what underpins NPA, is dropping the dogma. That's why, I'm passionate about helping healers and change workers, because I always noticed that was the bit I loved the most, was helping other people to overcome the struggles and frustrations they were finding with the mechanics of their various modalities, setting themselves free to really work in a sort of magical, effortless way. But through that whole thing, that dragged me into this field a long time ago, and the rest is history, as they say.
and it's such a contrast, isn't it? Being part of a rock band, and shifting into that space, that magical moment when you discovered that actually helping people, I'm good at this, and this is something I want to do more of. That's a huge shift.
It's a big shift, and yet there's really interesting commonalities with music and what I do, because when you write music, there's a thing called the muse. Same for all artists, really. They talk about the muse. And the muse really is the willingness to listen to what's becoming, what wants to be created. Oh. Usually the best artists and the best musicians. I mean, I look at the songs I've written and I kind of go, who wrote that? And often artists will say, they were just available for that art to work through them. And I think in a way, the best therapy, the best coaching is when there's a willingness and an ability to get out of the way and listen to that muse, or whatever that is in terms of, people have different names for it, the guidance, the this, the that, the other. But it's like, it's that willingness to sort of get out of the way, drop the agenda about what's supposed to be created, and be willing to sort of effectively co-create with the client what it is that wants to happen. So yeah, in a sense, it's a massive change, but I can see the skills that I had naturally for the music transfer pretty well to this field.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I know when one of the things that I do in my company is we train people in coaching qualifications. And right at the beginning of the process, people start with, well, tell me what the process is, and help me learn what the process is and what the questions are that I need to ask. And it gives comfort to have a framework to work from and a process to work with. But there's a magical moment when people drop that. And like you say, they sit more into really deep listening, not just in terms of what the person is saying, but also what they're experiencing as the person who's listening, that intuitive voice or sense of what comes next. What do I need to, what comes out of my mouth next?
Yeah.
And that's where the magic is. I when I see people drop the grow model and the sense of asking lots of questions, we get to a point where it is a magical moment, and you lose sense of time, you lose sense of what's around you, and you're just really, really present. The two of you are really present in that moment. And it's very, very powerful. Yeah.
It is. It's interesting that sort of, I love looking at that relationship between structure and chaos. So I'm a big fan of fluid structures. I think there's a lot of work being done in technology with fluid structures, and it's kind of more in the quantum model of reality. But it's like, because in the chaos and the fluidity, you have to acknowledge the benefit and necessity for structure within that. But it's the attachment to that that gets people balled up. But if you're willing to allow structures to form and fall away as appropriate in the moment, or to use the structures that, like you say, you learn a bunch of techniques, but then you need to sort of let go and hold them lightly, because then the right technique or variation of the technique will show up, which may have a structure for a period that the client needs, or you need as a coach. It's like, that's what's going to hold the space the best. Then you've got that wonderful interplay and dance of being willing and available to the structures, but there's a fluidity that is consistent throughout it.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. That really is. And tell us a little bit about the non-personal awareness and how that works, because one of the things I love about the way you introduce it is you kind of talk about how not to take things personally. And boy, how often do we take things personally, And it doesn't matter how much you tell yourself, and you actually say this, it doesn't matter how much you tell yourself not to take things personally or not to take this personally. Boy, I don't want to let go of that.
It's way too juicy.
Yeah. But it makes a huge difference, doesn't it? Not taking things personally, being able to drop it. But it can be really hard work to drop it unless you have NPA.
So unless you have a simple magical way that dropped into my lap in 2007.
Tell us about that.
No, it's fascinating. I mean, taking things personally. I've looked around. If you Google it, there's a bunch of very digital things you have to do, which none of which are very clear on what that actually means you have to do. To me, it comes down to true realization. And the NPA process, which is very simply 6 lines long, and there's like a space in it where you put the thing that you're working on. And that's a whole other topic, but it delivers the perspective that it's not personal in a way that helps you connect to it. And I say it delivers a perspective because people look at it and go, is that an affirmation just saying, well, it's not personal? That's not going to do. Well, no, because if you do it that way, you're trying to sledgehammer it. It literally is offering the perspective, but the way it's set up, it greases the wheels for that perspective to land. And when I really got into it, it's fascinating because it kind of popped out of me in 2007. I often say it popped out in answer to a prayer, which might sound a bit woo-woo, but I was at the time teaching. I was teaching all over the world with Brandon. I was teaching her work, rooms for people, practice full, top of my game, golden boy in the thing. And this weird prayer sort of just happened, like, hey, okay, God, universe, whatever. If there's something that wants to come through me specifically, I'm ready. It was like, oh, that was weird. And then it was a week later, I was sat in Costa's in Abingdon, journaling, being angry at my second wife. and it's like the words just popped out onto the page exactly as they are to this day. And what happened was the process I used to teach was like a 3-hour involved. You go into your history, your childhood, you do the empathy thing, you do NLP based memory changes, and you'd all sorts. Take about 3 hours. In about 2 minutes flat, it just went shroomp. It's like when the ice melts on the car, it suddenly the whole big lump just goes vroom off the edge. And I was like, holy crap, that was weird.
Yeah.
But it came with that kind of, this is the answer to your prayer. And and I was like, okay, what does that mean? I'm used to teaching these big chunky cognitive processes. How can I tell anyone that this is anything? So I spent about 18 months just playing with it, testing it with clients and my therapist friends, going, there's some 6 lines, a bit silly, but again and again people would go, oh my God, that's like magic, how does that work? And over that time I got to go, well, why does it work? Why is this little process so leveraged? And it took a while and to really understand it. But I started to get that taking things personally is kind of fundamentally the mechanism of how we exist. So, because if you think about taking things personally, what you're saying is that's me, that is. So you're identifying with something. And when you identify with something, you make it matter to you. And when it matters to you, I love that word matter, it comes into form. And there's 2 ways we take things personally. We say, that's me, that is, or we exclude ourselves from it and say, that's not me. Mm-hmm. So they have the money, I don't, and that's not me. But that's still a way of personalizing something in a distinct way. And then I thought, well, that's pretty profound, but what is it based on? Well, it's based on the idea, the sort of quantum model, everything is energy. And so in the energetic model, the quantum physicists will tell us that basically everything is non-local. Nothing exists distinctly locally. I'd say that's not personal. Fundamentally, everything is energy, it's waves. So my analogy for that is radio waves. We understand that the BBC World Service right now is broadcasting throughout the entire world. It's going through your body, Nicky. It's going through listener. It's going through your body right now. You've got the World Service happening through your body. Those waves are coming through your body. But you're not, unless you're tuned in, you're not experiencing it. So that tuning in piece is where you take something personally, you tune into that specific frequency, but fundamentally, nothing is personal. They're just potential waves, thought waves, experiential waves that can manifest. And so that's a lot for 6 lines, but that's what I've come to understand, is it helps somewhere inside you're really saying that's not actually me, and that frees up the possibility of going from that, what I call Velcro world, where it's kind of all sticks to you, to Teflon world, where the stuff that doesn't really resonate can just slide off with that shwump effect. And hence, I guess it caught fire and spread pretty wildly.
Yeah, and can you give us a flavor of what the 6 lines are? I know what the 6 lines are, but maybe just, you kind of told us the first one, but maybe take us just a little bit deeper.
Well, I'm happy to give you the 6 lines. It's like, so there's parts to the NPA, the core NPA process, under which there's the whole non-personal philosophy. It starts with this blah. So the blah is that's where the artistry in the process comes, is from identifying what is the label where the identification is held that points to the energy that is stuck or not moving, or out to come in or to go out. And I call that a cookie cutter, because it's like you take the sort of the star-shaped U and into the infinite cookie dough of life, and you create a distinct little shape out of it. So once you find that, you put it in the blank space. It's this. Let's make one up. A cookie cutter might be, because it could be a word, it could be a gesture, it could be a sentence. So maybe it's "I'm not good enough." Classic. I'm not good enough. So you'd say this, "I'm not good enough." Then the next line is this energy of "I'm not good enough." So that brings our attention to the fact that it's just energy, but energy still has charge. Then you say this pure energy of "I'm not good enough" is not personal. So that just offers that perspective. It's pure energy. That means it's neutral. It's just energy, and it's not personal. It's not me. You repeat that bit 3 times, and then there's the bit that people get stuck with. You say, then, "and I am willing to experience it." And what that really does is it allows you to really let it continue through its cycle. Anything that has come into your cycle of experience is already being experienced. I don't want to experience it. Well, you already are. If you're willing to experience it, then there's a going with it, the Aikido effect, if you like, or the catching the cricket ball effect for those of us raised having to play cricket. But those are the 6 lines. And then the process is in the discovery of what the thing is that you put in the blank space, the process itself, and the space afterwards, where people have revelations, and sometimes nothing, and that's fine too, because sometimes the response is non-local as well. And you kind of just you work with it and see where it takes you.
Yeah, it's such a simple tool and so powerful. That's what I like about it. Yeah. And I know you've really delved into the issue of conflict, because a lot of this is around conflict, isn't it? Whether it's conflict within ourselves or conflict with somebody else, something external. And you've come up with a harmony equation. So
yeah,
I love the idea of a harmony equation. I love the word harmony, but to have an equation around that, and I'm guessing it's different for each of us. Can I tell us
for different people in different circumstances?
Yeah, so tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, this comes back to, well, firstly, conflict. Conflict is at the core of so many things. Really, if I'm speaking to coaches and therapists, and they're finding people are stuck, often, not always, but often, somewhere in there is conflict, and a discomfort with conflict, or a seemingly unresolvable conflict, that if you can help resolve that in some way, then the gears begin to move again, and you can move into often what is, beyond that initial conflict. So any comfort zone that you come up against, any resistance that you come up against, quite often that's an indicator of conflict. And our society, our modern, certainly our Western society, is riddled with baked in conflicts, because we don't quite get that we are complex, contradictory creatures at heart. So, but the thing about the cookie cutters in NPA is I started to realize that people sort of have their own maps of the pieces of the puzzle. And if there was a way that we could identify or help them identify, without the dogma, without the logic, without all the stuff, all the often learned therapeutic, lingo and all the rest of it, just what's the simple map of what needs to happen here, then that would be really interesting. So in the harmony equation, it is at the heart of what I call the integration frame. So from NPA, basic NPA, there's about nearly 40 frames, which are all like equations or maps, which I teach in a mastery, which was our practitioner training, if you want to do non-personal awareness as a certified practitioner. But I thought that the harmony equation is the one, the integration frame is the one that I probably used the most. Time and again, the people that I've taught it to and use it in their practice, or again, I know a lot of the audience aren't, I'm not a therapist. You can still use this. It's simple. What I do, one of my genius things I say is like, I can make really complex things simple. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just lazy.
It helps.
We all have our motivations. But yeah, so what you're really doing is you're first of all identifying what are the parts that are in conflict, and then what's the map. And it's a very simple way to allow the answers to pop out of the client, so that you get a remedy for one side, a remedy for the other side. And then from that, when you then read that back, bang, the resolution comes. And the resolution in the situation is finding the label for the energy where both parts can fully get behind it. And within that, then we add in the NPA, which balances out all the energies. And it's amazingly profound when you do that with different parts. A number of times I've had clients go, wow, just simply like, oh my God, I've been wrestling with that my entire life. Mm. In fact, as part, because we're doing the event, the harmony equation, where I'm teaching this, is coming up this month. And one of the things that is a derivative is the harmony equation, it is the integration frame, but it's very targeted, and I call it the parental frame. Mm. It's my personal belief that it would be really great if everybody did at least a parental frame, because it takes your parents as the core conflict, and then you work out if mum, did this and dad did this, then there would be the thing that would actually resolve and let me land fully in this world.
Can you give us an example, Joel?
Of like a parental frame?
Yeah.
Well, I can think of when it first was born. Most of the stuff that is born through me, I say, pops out by accident. I was working in the Bahamas. It's a rough gig, but somebody's got to do it. I was teaching NPA out there. And I was doing a bunch of sort of one-to-one sessions with people. And there was this lady who came in, and she was in this sort of very heightened state of self-condemnation, but she was a self-confessed perfectionist and high achiever, and, and all this stuff. And then out of me, in a very as most people are trained way, and do we do language in this podcast? I didn't ask you before, because
it's fine.
It's fine, good. Because literally what I said is, who the fuck told you weren't good enough? And I was like I said to the song, where did that come from? You don't do that with a client, because I almost stood up, because in a way, I guess I was matching your energy, but it was like, who the fuck told you weren't good enough? And she literally said, well, my parents were good people, really.
Wow.
And then what came out of me was this harmony equation, like out of nowhere, literally, because there's some setup questions. I use what I call mindless sentence completion, because it creates a void. And we got to the core of what what from her perspective, her mum needed to let go of and let in, and what her dad needed to let go of and let go in, and then there would be, and she literally said harmony was the thing. So harmony is like a general word you might think of, but in that moment, that's the thing that resonated so strongly with her. And she said to me afterwards, because then we NPA everything that's come out of that. So we use the NPA process to not take it personally, disidentify from it, and just let it all flow. So, and after that process, I did the follow-up with her, and she was like, it's really weird because there's a strange sense of peace come over me. But she said, the weird thing is I've been trying to lose weight for years and I haven't particularly done anything. But the weight's kind of fallen off, and it was like one of those, and I see that a lot, these weird side benefits that had happened. But to me, the thing was that it was almost like this foundational stone within her where she was hanging on to this parental conflict, which is not even her, it's like it's the parents, but we internalize it. And by helping her find the resolution, there was a relaxation at a foundational level from which a lot of things then righted themselves all by themselves, which is what I find a lot with NPA, because it works at identity. So a lot of the beliefs, emotions, and behaviors sort of automatically change once you shift the identity.
Yeah, so that's really powerful. So there's a few things that I'm hearing here. One is that that at the core is identity, and that's where you're working. You're working with the core. So, and on top of the core of identity, there's like beliefs and all those other things. But you're working at that level with identity. Yeah. And that shifts beliefs, and that shifts all sorts of other things too, like you were saying about her losing weight. Yeah. Because you're working at that level. Yeah.
I love the whole topic of multiple personality disorder, which is now called, I think it's called, it's DID, but I'm trying to think what that stands for, and it's gone out of my brain.
Yeah.
But it's in the studies, they've shown that there are vast physiological differences in what they call different alters. Alters are the different alter egos or different personalities, to the point where they've seen in one alter, someone will have scar tissue, and in another alter, they will not have scar tissue. I mean, that is insane, but it speaks to the quantum physics. So the current studies of this, because they're starting to look and go, hang on a minute, that means there's a different physiological as well as psychological blueprint or pattern that goes along with the personality. And what is the personality and identity? So, and if you think about it just on an ordinary level, because I'm not encouraging us all to get into a clinical disorder of multiple personalities, but we kind of are all multiple personality at a more subtle level. And so when you work with an identity, just the simple one of being a good girl or a bad girl, if you're identifying as a good girl without even trying, the kind of beliefs you're going to have around it, and therefore the emotions you have around it and the behaviors you do are going to be very automatic, because you're in the I'm a good girl. And if I'm a bad girl, similarly, they're going to change. So if you shift the identity, those things sort of, because the identity is in charge. And it's one of the issues that can be the case with working at the belief level, for example, because if you don't shift the identity, that identity is very creative and very invested in survival, by the way. Yeah. So it can get very creative about how it massages the beliefs and changes them around, but still keeps its core effect, and therefore the emotions and behaviors and various different expressions of that through beliefs. And of course, sometimes a belief will hit an identity, and then you'll see the massive shift then. So it's kind of, and by the way, I'm not knocking belief work. It's really important, really, really good to do belief work. I'm just pointing to, I've noticed one of the reasons why NPA is so simple and so leveraged is it taps into that personalization, which is fundamentally identification.
Yeah, and it sounds like it really acknowledges the fact that even if you identify as being a good girl, that's not 100% true. And because I grew up with that notion of, now you've got to be a good girl, and then being rewarded for being a good girl. But there was a kind of another side of me that, you know, got away with murder, actually. And my sister hated me for it. She really did. Because I think what happened was we got into this situation where our parents, and more lastly my mum, saw me as the good girl and saw Jill as the bad girl, you know. And so we were kind of playing out these roles, but I had the bad girl and she equally had the good girl. But because of the roles, the identity that my mum was looking through, it ended up in this situation that she got exactly what she was looking for, because that's the lens that she was looking through.
Yeah.
But my sister knew that I was getting away with murder. I was bunking off school and, you know, not going to lessons and all sorts of stuff. And
Nicky, I never knew this about you.
I know. But my sister wasn't doing any of that. But my mum thought she was.
Yeah.
And I was getting away with it because it wasn't part of her lens of how she saw me. And so I could see how that becomes internalized, you know, and I could have ended up thinking, really, I'm a good girl. But I know the reality is I'm not.
Yeah.
And I've got lots of evidence to prove that I'm not. So, yeah, so that identity is key, really, isn't it? Recognizing that actually we're all these things. We're not just one.
When you acknowledge that these things are kind of alive in you, again, identity is an interesting word. It's got entity in it, and ID, id, self entity. Yeah. And so it's one of those fascinating things is when we start to go, well, like, that's why I like the multiple personality sort of as a pointer to the human condition, because they do have their life. So there's times they come out to play, and in those times they're activating that energy, which is sponsoring a whole bunch of beliefs, behaviors, and feelings. So archetypes are a good example. If you go into the victim archetype, you know, you can have a whole different energy around you, and the things, your lenses you wear are going to be very different to when you're in some other possibly more healthy, you know, part of you. And then of course, those things can come into conflict with each other when there's a situation where it's not clear which one is going to be most helpful. That's where you get conflict and stuckness and confusion and resentment, and all those things can build up, which is of course where the harmony equation can really help.
Yeah, and I can see how that would be really useful. And the harmony equation, I know you've got an event coming up, and we've got information about that in the episode notes for people to click on and find out more. And we've also got some information about NPA, and a link to that too for people to find out more. And the thing about the harmony equation, I know it's useful for practitioners to have this as a tool. But because there's so much unresolved conflict in the world, you know, and within relationships, I can see how this would be of benefit for anybody, actually. You know, it's not just about practitioners, is it? It's understanding yourself as well, and understanding how you can help people around you. You don't have to be a practitioner to use those tools.
One of my things is the fact that things seem to pop out of me in a simple way, or given to me in a simple way, that all the tools that I seem to come up with can be used by anyone. It's one of the reasons I say I love helping coaches and therapists and change workers in really coming into mastery. Because you have to acknowledge that a lot of this stuff, if you learn it, like say someone who's not a coach or a therapist and things, I'd really like to learn that, then come to the harmony equation. You know, it'll be taught for coaches, but you'll get it. And you can then use it. You can use it in your life. You can use it with your family. You know, it's so simple. NPA is very simple, and I love that about it. And it's like, you know, these days you can take an SLR camera out and you can take a decent picture. You can do that, and it's good. I love that people can do that. But if you want to be an artist, there's a difference. And it starts to get more subtle and more subtle and more subtle on what makes that difference. And that's, I guess, where my interest in terms of certifying non-personal awareness practitioners is that level of mastery. But absolutely, come along. I'd love to have you and learn it and just get it into the hands of people who go, I think I need to resolve some conflict. Come and find out about it.
Yeah, which is probably all of us at some point in our lives, isn't it? That's fantastic, Joel. That really is. And so, yeah, as you're listening to this, just notice in the episode notes, there are hyperlinks there so that you can find out more about these events, more about these processes that Joel and I have been talking about today. And Joel, as we come up on time, is there anything else you would have liked me to have asked you, or anything you'd like to say before we close?
I've really enjoyed this conversation. I love where you've taken us in this, or we've taken each other together. I think just if you have an inkling that this may be helpful, just go check out the links. It's very simple. It's the npaacademy.com/harmony for the event. And on that site, the npaacademy.com, you can download the NPA process for free. Go do it. You could write the words down, but just, it's a nice sheet and it talks you through it. Go get that. Otherwise, I think, it's just been wonderful to talk to you. I really appreciate it. I hope, listener, you've enjoyed this interaction, and I hope to connect with you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. Really appreciate your time. And thank you, listeners, for being with us on this podcast episode. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye for now.
Thanks so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this show, I'd love you to do me a solid and tell someone about it. They can find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and most other podcast platforms. Plus, if you visit the website www.babrillianthuman.com, you can share the show notes to social media and make my day. Also, make sure you hit that follow button, and if you haven't yet downloaded the NPA process sheet, head on over to joelyoungmpa.com and get your free copy today. Big love, and see you next time.